So I just started the recording,
Okay.
and yeah, I think it so happens that we were both trying to figure out the symbolism of the inner and the outer, maybe, or of John and Peter, also Mary and Martha. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was specifically looking at Peter and John, and once I started diving into that, it's just like it just keeps on going and unfolding. And Mary and Martha, of course, creeps into there, and
Yeah.
yeah, inner, outer, and then it ultimately rested in heaven and earth, contemplation and practice,
Oh,
and
yeah,
yeah,
right.
yeah. It was it I thought it would be like more simple than it actually it turning out to be. So
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, so yeah, I'd be real interested to talk about it. It just piqued my interest because, reading the Gospel of John, you notice a few weird patterns in there between Peter and John. Um,
Yeah.
a few ones, for instance, when during the Last Supper, when Jesus says that someone is going to betray him, and then Peter wants to know, but instead of just asking Jesus, he asks John, and then
Yes, John. Right.
and
Yeah.
then John answers. Also, the fact that at the resurrection, when the women come and tell the apostles that the tomb is empty, then Peter springs up, runs to the tomb, uh, but then he gets passed by John. John
Passed
reaches
by
the
John.
tomb, but he doesn't come in. He just
Yeah.
looks, and
Yeah.
then when Peter gets there, then he comes in. And then there's also the things that happen um, when Christ visits them as well. Um,
Hmm.
for instance, when they're fishing, and the first one that sees Jesus on the coast is John. He tells it to
Right.
everyone, including Peter. Peter goes all crazy, jumps into the,
Jumps in.
the water, swims to Jesus, um, and then also the last thing between Peter and John is when when Christ is explaining to Peter what's going to happen, and they're walking past John, and Peter is asking, "Well, what? You just told me that I'm going to have to feed your lambs," and I think he also tells him that he's going to be that he's going to die, and he asks, "Well, what will this one do?" And Christ tells Peter that, "What is it to you if that one tarries until I come again?"
Till I come again. Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting that, well, I mean, just beside the fact that I find it fascinating that we were both looking at this at the same time. Like, I've never noticed this before. I never even thought of how they connect and relate to each other
Mhm.
until, but actually the story that got me initially was, I think I initially was looking at the story in Luke, where Jesus sends them to prepare for the Passover dinner.
Mhm.
And so I initially went into it thinking about the upper room, they're talking about. But then I noticed that, like, okay, he sends John and Peter. That's interesting. And he sends them together. I was just kind of thinking, like, why Peter and John? And
Mhm.
then I started remembering all these other stories about Peter and John.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, the Passover one is kind of interesting, but it's because it's in Luke, it's hard to like put it with the stories of them in John, because
Mhm.
Luke has such a different approach,
Yeah.
and is kind of, he's almost less mystical about it, but you still
Can
can't
can you
ignore.
remind me what's the story specifically?
So in Luke, Christ says, go prepare the Passover meal, and he sends Peter and John, and they don't say what city they're going in or anything. So that's interesting. But he says, go find a man carrying a vessel of water, and then when you find him, he will bring you to the master of the house, and tell the master of the house that you're here to prepare the Passover dinner. He will take you to the upper room that is prepared for the dinner.
Mhm.
So that, I mean, you got so much things going on there with the vessel and the water and these unnamed people in an unnamed city and
Mm-hmm.
all that. But so I was originally I was trying to figure out how the story, the pre-Passover preparation had to do with Peter and John. So that led me into looking more into Peter and John, and then all the stories that you just referenced were
Yeah.
like, yeah. So, and it's kind of hard to get, like, when you get into the preparation of the Passover meal, it goes into this. It's something way else, you know.
Yeah.
But I did find in my research, which was mostly, I was trying to find what the patristics said concerning these two,
Yeah.
and I only found a couple of references. Um, the biggest one was from Saint Maximus
Mm-hmm.
in his Ambigua, and he just flat out says that John is the symbol, or Peter is the symbol of ascetic practice, and John is the symbol of contemplation.
John is the ascetic? Huh.
No,
Okay.
no. What did I say that wrong? Sorry. Peter is the symbol of ascetic practice,
Okay.
and John is the symbol of contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then that got me wondering. Well, I'm not sure what Maximus means by contemplation. So I
Mm-hmm.
had to look into what words he was actually using. That led me to he was using the word theoria
Mm-hmm.
for contemplation. So that made a little bit more sense. So, and in praxis is pretty obvious of what he's
Yeah.
saying there.
Yeah, it makes sense. I hadn't thought of it in terms of, I knew that Peter was the active one, uh, the one who goes out, who feeds the lambs, who gets martyred,
Mhm.
whereas John would be the contemplative one, the one that stays close to the heart of Christ, the one that
Right,
yeah, the one that ultimately, the one that finds Christ first. Let's say when they're in the boat, and also the one who can ask Christ things first, like asking for Judas, for
right,
instance.
yeah,
So I knew there would be this, like the idea that John is closer to the heart, but that Peter is the one that will go out, that will carry this message outwards.
right,
But I hadn't thought about it in terms of ascetic practice, in the terms that, well, since Peter is the one that's going to be carrying the message out, he will be, yeah, will be engaged in a practice of
right,
doing things and avoiding a bunch of things in doing so.
right,
Um, and this also made sense considering Mary and Martha, because the same sort of pattern is going on there, and I think
right,
it's helpful to think about it. Because, okay, so when there are two episodes. One of them, I think one of them, I don't remember where this particular story is. The first one, maybe the most famous one, is when Jesus is eating with them, and Mary is just sort of contemplating Jesus. She's just, asking questions and so on. And whereas Martha is the one who's preparing the meal, and then
right,
she asks Jesus, "Well, I mean, shouldn't she be helping me?" But then Jesus says that Mary has chosen the best part, and it will not be taken away from her. So you have the idea of the active, which is Mary, and which is Martha, sorry, and then
Martha,
the contemplative, which is Mary, and that she has the best part somehow, but that you still need someone to feed you, but it's a relationship between the active and the passive. But
yeah,
I think the better story is what happens when uh, Lazarus dies, and when Christ comes to the city, and Martha goes to meet Jesus, and she tells him that, well, my brother died, and you could have saved him, presumably. And then they discuss a bit, but it sort of goes nowhere. And then Martha goes back. She gets married. So Mary goes to Jesus. She
oh
starts
yeah,
weeping, and then she makes Jesus weep as well. And then he decides to go and go raise Lazarus from the dead.
that's right, yeah,
So
oh yeah,
so there's the idea of the sort of the active relying on the contemplative,
yeah.
the same
And
way that.
the flip too, because like even
Mhm,
at the tomb, whenever John reaches the tomb, he doesn't
yeah,
go in to the tomb. He waits for Peter to enter in first. So it's like the action has to enter into that, which the tomb can just really mess with you. I kept thinking, I was like, well, why, like, I get that, you have, like, it totally makes sense that, like, contemplation will go first and then your practice will try to catch up to that. Right. That makes sense. But then the part where your ascetic practice is going ahead of your contemplation, it's almost like you're not even aware of why you're doing this. You're just doing it. And then hoping that the contemplative part of you will catch up to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that, and that part that's the most trickiest part for me to at least understand, is that why, not even why, but how your contemplative will follow an ascetic practice or any kind of action in a way. Because it almost like you're like in a way it makes sense for, like, I keep thinking about my 4-year-old who's very, like, he acts without thinking, and then the thinking catches up eventually, and then hopefully there's a revelation to him when he realizes he probably shouldn't have acted first. But Peter is constantly doing that. He's just acting, moving forward without, like, there's no thinking. He's speaking without even thinking, and it works for him. It's like that's what's supposed to happen for him, is to
it works as long as in relationship with John and with Christ.
Right. And there's another scene in Acts, I think it's Acts, where Peter and John are going to the temple to pray, and that's whenever they come across the lame man, and they heal him. Right. That's the one. It's got that famous line, silver and gold I do not have, but what I have I freely give you. Rise up. And so what's interesting in all that too is that John you never hear from John. Like, he never speaks at all in that. It's like, and it's like he's invisible the whole entire time, which adds into his contemplative, personality, I guess you could say. So, but what was fascinating to me is that whenever they're together, headed towards prayer, is whenever a healing happens, that there's a rising up, but it's not before. Whenever they're going like this the whole time, there's not a lot that they are actually doing, it goes, it's flipping around and crazy when it gets into your head. So it's good to talk about it.
It's good to talk about it and to see it maybe at an even, so maybe we can try to see it as a hierarchy where, Christ in himself as incorporeal, fully gathers those two sides, the inside and the outside, the active and the passive, the active and the contemplative within himself, and then he will embody it in his church through his 12 apostles. And then you have the extremes of Peter and John, were like the most active and the most contemplative. And in the same way that those two things were united in Christ, they're united within the church with Peter and John. And what seems to have happened in history is, I think you can see the same sort of split going on with, like, the churches that Peter and John founded as well. And it's why I started to think about this initially, because I was, I'm Catholic. That's my background. So, and it's fairly obvious that we're, let's see, we have all the positives and negatives of Peter. We're active. We have, like, tons of charities and so on. We're organized, like the leader of the Vatican is well structured. We can, let's say, anytime something big happens, we can react well because we're a well-structured organization and so on. So it has the good sides of order, but it also has the bad sides of order, like the corruption and the fact that sometimes things get too rigid and then it could fragment in the Protestant Reformation, for instance. And you can even see it in the terms of the, like, okay, so our hierarchy on earth, you have the Pope at the top, and the Pope is someone who is fairly active. I mean, he's all of our bishops and the popes are all priests, so they're all in the world doing things. Mm-hmm. And then I was listening to talks by an Orthodox priest monk, and I was noticing that I was seeing some let's say the other side of the pattern where it struck. What jumped out to me most was even just in the form of the hierarchy I just laid out of all of their bishops. I think you're Orthodox, right?
Almost. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a catechumen. Yeah.
Okay, because I think your all of your bishops are taken from monasteries.
Yes.
So you take the contemplatives, and they will be what is at the top of your hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Or at least, I mean, I should say the earthly hierarchy or the outward hierarchy. And then, because I talked about this with Jonathan as well, so yeah. This idea that I was sort of trying to see the two patterns. And you can also bring the fact that in the Catholic Church, scholasticism and just the whole idea of being very explicit about your metaphysics, of trying to lay it out in clear propositions and being a bit less mystical, to be clearer, to be more orderly. That's something you see in the Western Church. And you don't see this as much in the Eastern Church. It's more contemplative. You still have all of your Neoplatonism going, whereas we went progressively towards Aristotelianism, and then it even fragmented further in the Protestant Reformation.
Right.
So you can see sort of the mysticism further on the East. You can see also the fact that it's taken, the hierarchy is more occupied by contemplatives. So it looks to me like the Church of John, whereas the Catholic Church is more the Church of Peter. And as those two fragmented in history, you can see like the bad sides going on in the Catholic Church due to precisely this fragmentation, I think. And we could talk about other sort of apostles that fit in there of how the Western Church then fragmented, not only Peter were from John, but also from, let's say, Paul. You can see the Protestant Reformation, especially as going too far outside, like Paul losing contact with Peter. He's going so far to evangelize the Gentiles that he just gets gathered up in the Gentiles. You can even see Thomas, who has it wasn't a bad thing that Thomas asked questions and that he was correct, that he wanted to see Christ smooth. Like, it's good to ask questions. It's good to have a good reasons. And then after he saw this, he was a very determined apostle, and he did a great job. But and it's a bit like the atheists today, which all come out of the West, and it's good to ask questions, but they lost touch from the rest of the church. Yeah. So the same sort of fragmentation, that the same sort of unity. Okay, so initially the unity was between you could see the unity of the active and contemplative within Christ. You can also see it when Christ set up his church between Peter and John. And then you could see it in the first churches that functioned well between East and West.
Right.
And now we see it split in time. So that's why I was thinking about those stories.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It actually, my wife has. Whenever I was talking to this with my wife, she actually kind of mentioned it in the way that you're speaking of, about the East and the West, and I didn't see it like that, and I can see it like that, but I couldn't get myself to think there yet.
Yeah.
That was just a little bit too macro, I guess. But yeah, I can totally see it. Okay, well, sorry, I get lost whenever I get stuck on something, and I just like want to focus on it for a while. It's my introverted part of me wants to just like, okay, now I'm just going to sit and contemplate for the next few days.
Yes.
So
it's a good thing to do. And yeah, even what you just said is, goes to the point of this harmony between the contemplative and the active is something that, it happens, okay, within Christ, it happens within
Right.
his apostles, within his churches, and
Right.
within just ourselves as well. If we're to function properly, we also have to do this. Even monks,
Right.
they still have to add some sort of activity. Most of them will do
Yes.
some work, and it helps their practice ultimately. It helps
Right.
their even contemplative life. So those, so the harmony between the active and the contemplative have to function at all layers of reality. And it's also
Right.
another reason why I was trying to figure out the symbolism, because, okay, so why would you become, let's say, a monk, or why would you get married? Why would you do so and so? What sort of, yeah, how should you fit those active and contemplative parts of yourself? Which
Right.
sort of vocations
Mm-hmm.
do you privilege? And this brings me back actually to the priest monk I was mentioning, because he was saying, yeah, oh yeah, I think this is one of the points where it became clearest to me. I was listening to the priest monk, and he was saying that, okay, of course, if you can, you should become a monk. That's the best thing you can do. Like, if you can be contemplative, like John, or like Mary, it's the best thing you
You're
can do.
right.
So the only reason not to really is if you can't for some reason, and then if you can't manage it, if you can't be a good monk, then of course don't be a monk. But if you can, it's the best thing to do. Whereas if
Right.
I talk to a priest in my church, he would say that, well, if you can, the best thing to do is to become a priest. Of course, if you can't, don't do it. But if you can, it's the best thing to do is to be actively sacrificing yourself for Christ, like Peter did.
Yeah.
So those different churches will, will
Interesting. Yeah.
will put one ahead of the other, and it was a bit confusing to me, because oh man, what should I do then? But
Right.
what,
Go
and
with
then I think that the real answer
get
is
married. Get married. Then. Yeah.
that's honestly what I will do. But I was still just a bit torn from the fact that, well, some people are telling me that if I can, I should do that, or if I can, I should do that.
Right. Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that the real answer was to precisely go back to those stories and try to understand that it's not really that Peter is better or that John is better. It's that they have to work in communion with one another,
Right.
and it
Right.
only makes sense at this level. Uh, if they split, then they will both be worse off. Like, you can't say
Right.
that one of them is on top. A good way to say it was, Jonathan told me this. You can see that Peter is is the head of the explicit hierarchy, or of the outer hierarchy, whereas John is the head of the inner hierarchy. Is the head of
Oh, okay.
the hidden hierarchy. So,
Right.
or another
Yeah.
way to put it is that Peter has the explicit power, and John has the hidden power.
Yeah. Okay.
And this works, for instance, in the fact that, okay, well, John is preaching, sorry, not John, Peter is preaching,
Peter.
Peter is healing people, and so on. Whereas, but John always has to be there, and he's the one who will make intercessions to Christ.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the active and contemplative have to work
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Yeah. Work together, and it's like, and it's not even. Yeah, and it's the work. It's like who I think I want to say that Saint Maximus even talks about how they have to work together, but at the same time rival each other.
Yeah.
It's like the race to the tomb, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's they're racing against each other to get there. They're
They
not.
get there
They're not.
faster. Yeah.
Yeah, and John gets there faster, right? But then he has to wait,
Yeah. Yeah. But he made
or he does wait, whatever it is.
yeah, he
Yeah,
probably made Peter get there faster because he ran. They both
yeah,
help each other this way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that's interesting because like whenever uh, whenever because I was an atheist prior to becoming Orthodox, and
Mhm.
um, what got me to Orthodoxy, or just what got me to Christ in general,
Mhm.
was a contemplation. There wasn't any. There wasn't any type of activity. You know,
Right.
it was. I wasn't going out and I don't know, whatever you could do. Like I know for ascetic practice in the Orthodox tradition, it's fasting, and you can even add in things like even in the prayer life. You know,
Mhm.
it's a very active with lots of prostrations and
Yep.
bowing, and and stuff, and crossing yourself like 1,000 times. And but the contemplative part got me to Christ. But then it wasn't until I actively went, and I'm sure, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but the whenever people begin to ask about orthodoxy, what most people say is come and see.
Yeah.
They don't, typically they don't say, oh, you should read this book first. They do say that, but the underlying theme is come and see and experience it. So it was like my contemplative part got to that part. Then I had to be active. My active part had to come in and then actually enter into the church. And then of course my contemplative part eventually caught up to me. Right. And then at that point, then you can move. Then you can move on. Otherwise you're going to be. It's like you're stuck in that same spot. And obviously that's what happens whenever you contemplate too much. You think, you're just sitting there thinking, and then what? You're stuck. And even like right now, like this conversation that we're having right now, I've been stuck. Like since I wrote you that email, I've been stuck with where I was going to go with what I'm reading. And so now we're becoming active and having an active conversation. I can already see like whatever I was going for, I can already see like more of the, like, because I was trying to write the essay, the more the essay is starting to unfold, as we do it. So
so they sort of, the active and the passive really have to work together, and it's and it makes sense, the way they work. I think it fits with your example. It fits with the story. It fits with the stories we mentioned also. Well, of course, the active is the part that is further from the center, that is sort of going outwards, and then the inner is the part that is closer to the heart of the hierarchy. It's not as active. It stays close to the center. And you need both. I mean, you need the outer for the center even to just survive, and to expand also. Otherwise, it's going to get eaten by something else. So your ideas, let's say, just your ideas for your contemplation to survive, to keep going, to keep improving, you sort of have to gather something from the outside. You have to incorporate new things and then bring them back to the center. But also, if someone was to just try to go outwards, be active with no center, then of course he would ultimately, he would lose his center, he would forget, he would die, go towards death, towards fragmentation. And the church did this well for a while. And a cool example, which Jonathan told me, is there during one of the early councils. So there was a bunch of priests and bishops. They spent like months drafting something, and so they're the active people. They're doing something in the world, trying to get their churches to function, trying to not get in bed with heresies and so on. But then, after all of those people spent all of that time thinking and actively, discussing and so on, they went to see Saint Simeon, the one who stood on top of a tower for like 30 years, I think. And they went and saw him and told him, okay, can you read this and tell us if it's okay? If you don't agree, we're just going to restart. So although like the priests and the bishops had the explicit power and they're the active one, and they're on top of the hierarchy, they had to go see the head of the inner hierarchy, the inner life. They had to see the monk who has been doing nothing but standing on a pole for 30 years and praying. They had to go see that guy, and because he's closer to the center, he's closer to Christ. He is ultimately like the one with the hidden influence, the hidden power. And another cool example was during the Avignon papacy. There was a controversy where there were like 2 or 3 popes at the same time. It was a huge mess. And for the explicit power, you would think that, okay, well, it's the Pope or it's the priest and so on. But to settle the issue, they went and saw Saint Catherine of Siena. So she's a woman with no real power. I don't think she was really I don't think she was the head of a convent or anything. She was a Dominican woman who went and like preached to people. But and I think she Yeah, I would have to check, but I think she was isolated for a while as well. But anyways, they went and saw her, and she went and like settled the issue with the popes. Like she was the one with the hidden authority. She's
Mm.
not a priest or a bishop or anything, but she was still the one with the hidden authority. So
Huh.
it's like,
Interesting.
when I think it's the same thing as when Peter is the head of the apostles, but at the Last Supper, he knows that John is the one with the hidden power, the one who
Right.
can like intercede with Christ.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. John is at the center. Yeah, he's at the center. Yeah, that's very true. It's also like, if speaking of that moment too, is also, I saw like that's a very good representation of the inner and outer, right? Where Peter,
Yeah.
which is interesting because Peter is also the apostle to the Jews on the inside,
Mhm.
but in that moment he's on the outside,
Yeah.
where John is on the inner. And I always lay, whenever every time I talk about or think about inner and outer, I always lay it out as the church.
Mhm.
So so at the center, at the altar, you have Christ's heart, and then you have John leaning up against, he's at Christ's heart, right? So
Yeah.
he's in the altar, and then Peter is like, he's
On
like
the chair.
in the right, he's like, or even in the nave, and almost even at the narthex, like he's outside,
Mhm.
like trying to understand the mysteries of the inside still. So he could be in the nave or he could be in the narthex. I haven't figured that part out,
Yeah. But
but
is speaking to people and trying to
yes,
gather them.
right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, he's still on the outside of it, looking in there. Yeah. um
Yeah.
but there was something else I was going to say that you brought to mind, about oh yes, so the contemplative, the practice part of it. um there's this, um some counsel that priests have given. My priest gave this counsel to me one time, and I've read it other
Mhm.
places too, where it's like, if you're having difficulties in your prayers, right? And which everybody kind of stumbles upon, and they're like, I just don't, whether you not feel it, whatever that means, or it's like you just can't get there, your heart, your mind can't get there. It's always, the advice is usually, it's like, just do it anyway.
Yeah.
Just actively participate, do your prostrations, read the prayers, uh,
Mhm.
just keep going forward, and eventually that contemplative part will catch up and we'll
Yeah.
enter into it, right?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. That's how we learn anything, really.
right,
It's always a
right,
mix of the two. You
right,
even just you're in school and the teacher tells you something, and then you just listen, like you're just trying to contemplate whatever truth she's telling you, and some
yeah,
percentage of it will stick, but not that much. And then she gives you an exercise, and then you practice it, and
right,
then you're able to get further. And then at
right.
some point you sort of get stuck again, and then she will tell you new things, so you
Mm.
contemplate again, and then okay, you get, now you're able to go a bit further, so you go back to the active, you keep going your exercises and
Yeah,
so on. So you always mix those.
did
Whenever we
you,
learn anything, I think it's always the pattern.
right, did you ever, have you thought about how invisible John is, and how how Peter is like the rock? Have you thought about that at all? Like, because, so you have, I mean, it goes, that ties into, and actually, Jonathan mentioned this because whenever we talked like a month ago,
Mhm.
he mentioned John being invisible, and that, like, oh, of course, because if John's invisible, because
Mhm.
he doesn't hardly say anything, and he certainly doesn't even reference himself
Mhm.
in as anything but the disciple whom Jesus loved,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Right. Mm.
Right, and then you go to, and I'm pretty sure that the story of on the boat, whenever John sees Jesus, he doesn't even reference himself with a name, you know. It's like the obscure, it's like the disciple closest to Jesus or something like that. I'd have to go back and look, but he
Yeah.
doesn't say, I mean, he certainly doesn't say, I saw Jesus, and he doesn't say John saw Jesus. He
No.
references this generic term
Yeah.
about who he is. And
Yeah.
then, of course, Peter. but with Peter being the rock, you know, and the foundation, you
Mhm.
know, and then John being the invisible one, the heaven part, it's like you can really see, you know, especially Matthew's.
Oh, can you lay that out again? I hadn't thought of it this way, of heaven and earth. Can you say that again?
Yeah, so Peter is the rock, right? The foundation, and he's the
Yeah.
one that's always seen and 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 you're
Yeah, that's
engaging
on
with.
the earth. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then John is not. He's invisible. And so
Yeah,
it's like
right.
the perfect heaven and earth. And
Mm.
then only when they come together are they able to act out and basically be Christ on earth,
Yeah,
right?
that's true. Yeah.
Right? Like in
Mm.
Acts, whenever they go to the temple, you know, and I mean, and then you can even notice the fact that it's like they weren't, that story in Acts is they were together, and what were they doing? They were going to pray. So
Mhm.
like that was, I think that has a lot to do with it too, especially when you reference Paul's, you know, pray without ceasing constantly, you know,
Yeah.
and then and then that's whenever they were able to act out and be Christ, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And that made me think also when we were speaking about giving a practical example of when we're learning something, but
Mhm.
also this union of heaven and earth, we can see it occurring when sort of we have a flash where those two meet in our minds. When
Right.
we were maybe trying to figure out a problem, we're trying to solve this equation or whatever, we didn't get it. We were trying to just practice, but it was getting nowhere. Then we turn to
Yeah.
the teacher. We just contemplate what she tells us. She gives us the answer, and then in that flash,
In
once we
that
get
moment,
it,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're able to connect the two together. Okay, that's what I was doing wrong. That's what I will do. Uh,
Right.
and yeah,
Yeah.
at that moment we connect the two. That's a little piece of heaven right there. A little piece of
Yeah.
heaven on earth. A bit of
Yeah.
paradise when the patterns and the practice meet.
Whenever they meet together, yeah. And then that flash of light. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Huh.
yeah, that's awesome. Uh,
Yeah, there was something. A friend of mine who's been Orthodox for a few years. He was giving me some more theological aspects of what the church teaches, and I'm not. I'm really bad at theology. So, so and as a catechumen, I shouldn't be even talking about theology. So
really? Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
So where we're at now, I'm in a good place. I can I'm not really talking about theology. So, but yeah, I'll have to go back and look because I wrote down what he said.
yeah. Hmm.
Um, but it had something. Oh, maybe it might have been where he was talking about like theoria, like it has to do um, with seeing, like the etymology of the word means like to see and to um, and because that's where you get the words like your theory and even theater is derived from that, right?
From
So which is all
seeing, huh?
based, right? Yeah, so it's all, and it's based on the scene. And um, yeah, but and I want to say that there has to do something with like seeing and like there's this thing about entering in that I can't quite grasp yet. And I think that has less to do with just theoria
Hmm.
and more with the whenever theory and praxis are together,
Hmm.
like you enter in, which is kind of shown in with the tomb in a way, but that's more like praxis enters in. But did you
Oh
notice
yeah.
also that like
Oh, that's
that
interesting. Yeah, that
yeah,
that John saw
John
inside.
saw, and
Yeah,
whenever he was in there, that was interesting. John saw and believed.
yeah,
It didn't say anything about Peter believing what he
yeah.
saw.
Peter
It's
just went
very,
in. Yeah,
he just went in and
yeah,
yeah, and did Peter stuff. But John entered in, saw the burial clothes, and believed.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, so that's where the theoria and the seeing and then the belief are tied together somehow,
yeah.
which makes sense. I mean, obviously, you're not going to, just by practicing something, just by doing something, you're not going to necessarily believe it, you know,
No,
in
no.
a way,
You
because you have,
you won't get to the abstract stage. Yeah, like that's something animals
right,
can do. Like animals can practice things and they can get to a certain level, but without
yeah,
abstract concepts, they don't get very far.
right, right, yeah, and even yeah, it's like, and we even know people too that, and I think that's one of the dangers is that some people can rely too much on just the practice side of things, the action
Hmm.
and things, and not even think of, you know, because you have you have people who are just like, because I work in a factory, and you see people, they just come to work, they don't even think about what they're doing. In a
Mhm.
way, that's an interesting aspect, because it's like at some point they did think about it, then their actions caught up to them, and now it's just they're just on autopilot, and there's
Yeah.
no contemplation involved in it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, then you have other people who, because I also work with a lot of engineers,
Mhm.
so they have a lot of contemplation, and then they try to force their contemplation into practice, and without ever actually practicing it,
Yeah.
and it just
Blows
blows
up.
up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it never actually works out. So
Yeah.
yeah, you have to have the heaven and earth, even within a factory, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And anything that exists. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. That blew my mind. It's always really cool to talk about those things. Yeah, I don't have much other to say. I'm gonna have a lot to think about now.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm pretty much just thinking about it now.
Yeah, but this was really fun.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
good. It's very good talk. I'm really glad we talked this stuff out, because now hopefully I can have more to say and think about in the future.
Yeah.